Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast, coming to you live from the massive studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. You know, we've always said this year we're going to do a bunch of Cloudcasts, as we always do, and as the interest and demand around serverless and functional functions as a service and serverless, continues to grow, we're gonna mix in a bunch of serverless shows as well. So today we're gonna dig into some more serverless technologies, and very excited to have Sebastien Goasguen, who is a founder of Skippbox, with us today. Sebastien, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. Good to be on the show.
So you have been a friend of the show for a long time. You and Aaron used to work on CloudStack together and a lot of different technologies. So for anybody that doesn't know you, give us a little bit of your background, kind of what you've been working on the last couple of years around cloud, and then what you guys are doing over at Skippbox these days.
Yeah, sure. So I have a long history in open source and IT in general. I was heavily involved in research and grid computing, things like CERN and transferring data to analyze everything that was happening in the LHC here in Geneva. I had the chance to work on CloudStack, as really a follow-on to a lot of research that I did. So that was a lot of fun for several years, working on virtual machine systems. And when containers picked up, I was really picked because, mostly because containers had been around for a while, and it was funny to see, this basically storm, around Docker. So I picked up containers, wrote the O'Reilly Docker cookbook, and doing so, I discovered Kubernetes just when Google got started writing it in the open. So I decided to make a big jump and found Skippbox to work in the Kubernetes space and develop software around Kubernetes.
Yeah. So give folks who don't know Skippbox just a high-level overview of the areas you guys work on there, and maybe some of the technologies that they may have heard of.
Yeah. So first the name, because people wonder why Skippbox. So. Yeah. We actually made a little bit of a mishmash there between skipper, the skipper of the boat.
Yep.
Kubernetes being the captain of the container ship. So the skipper and toolbox, because what we wanted to focus on at the beginning was really onboarding new users into Kubernetes and the container ecosystem. So we decided to create a toolbox for Kubernetes. So some of the first tools that we did were K-Machine, which was a fork of Docker Machine, but allowed you to get a quick Kubernetes standalone system. And then we did Compose with a K, which basically allows people who have developed Docker Compose files to easily migrate to Kubernetes. And we're very happy because we put that in the Kubernetes incubator, and Google got on board, Red Hat got on board. And it's been developed pretty actively. So we started with this toolbox idea, but really, what we want to do, in the several years, in front of us is really concentrate on the applications. How is containers going to change the way we design applications, manage them, package them, and then build those distributed applications.
Right. So. One of the things that, and I don't know if you guys consider it an official project or, it starts as an open source project. So you guys have something out there now called Kubeless, which is described as a serverless framework for Kubernetes. And we're going to dig into that in some detail. But I want to kind of get your 2 cents so far on where you see kind of this serverless movement, functions as a service heading. You're in Europe. Obviously, there's a lot of meetups going on around there. But what are you hearing just around serverless in general in terms of usage versus hype versus concerns people have?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And I recently gave a talk at Config Management just after FOSDEM. Gave a talk on serverless. And the biggest thing that I want to put out there is don't dismiss this this new phenomenon. It's easy to dismiss the hype and say, oh, yet another technology and so on, but we should actually pay close attention. something that came up in config management was a talk by Patrick Desbois, who was known as one of the fathers of DevOps.
Right.
And he started talking, instead of serverless, he started talking about serviceful. And to me, that it really resonates. It's this idea that now with containers and Kubernetes and OpenShift and so on, and of course what we see in the cloud, AWS, Google, and so on. When we design application, now we have to deal with services, and we have to stitch all those services together. And to me, that's where lambdas and functions, come into play, because they're, those really small logical units that allows us to stitch all those services together. So maybe instead of serverless, we should talk about serviceful. And that's really where, it's an evolution of practice of how we design application, and we have to keep with this evolution and change a little bit the way we design apps. So now in terms of what people are saying, definitely the serverless meetup in London is really big. You got Ant Stanley over there doing a great job, and I was talking with Ant a couple of weeks ago, and he told me Nordstrom, for example, the shop.nordstrom.com, it's entirely running on serverless.
Interesting.
So that surprised me. Thomas Cook, as a search, there is a little search capability on their website, and that's all running on Lambda. So there are things that are popping up that are real production use and real big companies using lambdas. Ant even mentioned that Barclays allegedly has a 50 people serverless team. So it's real.
Yeah, no, I could see. I mean, we as we've talked to some people, those were a couple of the use cases that we had heard people talk about. Single page websites were possibly moving to serverless. We had heard an example through one of the Amazon events. It wasn't the big one, but one of the mid-year events. People were talking about a company who had taken their search application, broken it down into serverless functions, and were kind of decomposing it. So yeah, I think we're going to see that more and more. I think it's always good to hear people talking about what are the actual use cases that are out there. So it's good to hear that. And yeah, I hadn't heard the Barclays one. I know the Capital One folks are spending a lot of time looking at serverless. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's definitely something that's out there. Let's dig a little bit into your project that you guys have published as open source Kubeless. You mentioned on the page, look, there's some other sort of functions as a service, serverless, that are available to run on Kubernetes. You guys have created this. Let's talk a little bit about the architecture. What was the purpose behind it? What makes it sort of unique? Kind of walk us through the basics that you explain to people.
Yeah, so the basics really started, and we got triggered on this when and actually triggered is a good choice of word with serverless. But we were at KubeCon back in November in the US, and a few talks got my interest. One was from Brandon Burns at Microsoft, one of the Kubernetes founders. He gave a talk on compiling to Kubernetes. So this idea that you write a code almost like as a serial app running on a single machine, and you can compile and automatically it gets distributed. So that's an interesting concept. And then there was Craig McLuckie, now at Heptio, who said that he was really looking forward to see a serverless framework on Kubernetes. So we came back from KubeCon, and I was like, Kubernetes is the perfect platform to build a system like this. So one of my guys came to my house, and we sat down for several weeks. Several days. It was actually pretty short, and we got started building it. Because Kubernetes is basically an open version of Borg, right. And when you see Google with Google Cloud Functions, it means that Google Cloud Functions is managed by Borg. So if we do serverless on Kubernetes, it makes total sense.
Yep.
So then, what we did, we used something in Kubernetes little less known, which is third-party resources, and it allows you to actually build up your own API endpoint. So I think that's one of the aspects that makes Kubeless a little bit different than the other solutions. So we leverage third-party resource, and that means that we can define what a function is. So now you can have, if you are a command line guy, you can do, kube control, get function, delete function, and so on. And then once you have this, basically what we did is that we wrote a controller. So in Kubernetes, you can write lots of controllers, and they're basically code that run inside the cluster as a containerized application. And that controller watches those new API endpoints and then performs actions. So in our case with Kubeless, when we create a function, the controller detects that and then launches a container, and the function gets injected in the container and is being served over HTTP or a publish-subscribe system using Kafka. So it was surprisingly easy to get started and to set this up, and we feel like by using third-party resources, the idea of a controller, using a containerized Kafka deployment, we're really leveraging everything that you can do with Kubernetes.
Yeah, no, and it makes sense. It's the framework within Kubernetes is there to do this. Obviously, it understands containers, it understands different types of jobs. How do you, obviously, people always want to compare things to Lambda because it's been out there for a while. They kind of have a sense of what that experience is like. One of the things people like about Lambda is, you don't really have to think about scaling, right? So if you throw, if the function is sitting there and it gets 10 requests, it manages those. If it gets 1,000 requests, it manages those. How do you deal with that from a Kubernetes perspective? Because Kubernetes, has the idea that you sort of tell it what you want, sort of upper and lower bounds and so forth. Like, how do you go about doing that in sort of a kubeless world, so you don't have to think about like scaling parameters?
Yeah. So right now it's currently in development,
okay.
And what we have basically is that we've instrumented the runtime. So the runtime is basically what's running the functions, and we've instrumented the runtime with Prometheus, which is another CNCF project. And then we are looking at the horizontal pod autoscaler, which is another API resource in Kubernetes that you get it out of the box, when you use Kubernetes.
Yep.
And when we create the function, the runtime is created in a horizontal pod autoscaling group, if you wish.
Okay, that makes sense.
And once you get more resources, the count of the number of requests is counted by Prometheus, and then we scale the autoscaling group. So the main idea is that Kubernetes is such a great platform to manage standard application, but also to build systems, that we want to leverage as much of the Kubernetes primitives as we can.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And what you're doing in terms of auto scaling, you're just sort of hiding that complexity from the function builder. Yeah, so that makes a ton of sense. Now, the initial initial piece that you guys have built, you use Python as the language that's supported. What's the we saw this with Lambda. I think it initially came out with Java, and then Python got added. I've seen different frameworks for doing serverless. They start with a language. Containers and Kubernetes in essence are kind of language and framework agnostic. Is it just a matter of picking something to start with, or are there certain things that languages, frameworks that lend themselves better to serverless, or what's, how should people look at this in terms of their favorite language and so forth?
So for us, it was really a choice of what we're comfortable with.
Yeah.
So when we started building Kubeless, my guy is a Go developer, so he was taking care of writing the controller, and we already had lots of experience with writing controllers. So he was writing it all in Go, and then I actually wrote the basic Python runtime. right now it's relatively simplistic, but we went with Python because I know Python quite well, so
Okay.
that was the main decision. But that said, the biggest request we're seeing, and we got quite surprised by the how Kubeless was received. We got quite a few people calling us saying, hey, we want to go with serverless on Kubernetes. We really like Kubeless, but we want to see Node.js.
Yep.
So that's probably the biggest request right now is like Node.js runtime and then Java, and that's mostly because people want to write their functions in JavaScript,
Right.
Right. Mostly.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the next runtime that we put out there.
Okay. Yeah, and that makes sense. And people want to do asynchronous stuff, and Java's obviously and Node being huge in terms of popularity. What do you?
Brian, if I can just add something.
Sure.
For me, the big thing, is that those kind of on-prem solutions are probably going to struggle with, and I'm being very open here.
Mm-hmm.
Is that with Lambda, you have all the services on AWS that are there, and those services can publish events and trigger functions. Okay.
Right.
When we move on-prem with something like even OpenWhisk or Function or Fission, and Kubeless, the real challenge and where we're gonna have to work on as a community is making sure that the services that we deploy on-prem in something like Kubernetes or OpenShift, those services need to be able to emit events.
Yeah.
Because that's where we're gonna be able to leverage and really take advantage of a serverless kind of almost design architecture.
And that's one of the patterns we hear quite a bit is people saying, when a database table gets updated, when a file in an object store gets updated or deleted, like kick off a notification and then an additional action can take place, or whatever other service that might be. Let's talk a little bit. You mentioned some of the other types of projects that are out there. We've had a chance to talk to some of them, OpenWhisk and Fission. And what have you heard? And I'm not looking for an answer per se, but having the community be sort of fragmented about this probably isn't great in terms of getting. It's great in terms of early ideas are out there, people can work on things, but it's not great long term in terms of getting people to move a lot of things forward. What have you heard from people, either from those communities or just in general, saying, hey, Kubernetes should have a functional service, just like they have stateful sets or batch or anything like that? Where do you see this sort of evolving?
Yeah, I think this is all natural. It's a new evolution.
Sure.
It's evolution of how we design applications, and we're seeing projects come out that allow you to do serverless on-prem. So some of them, there might be some consolidation between the projects. Some are gonna gain in popularity. Some are gonna fade away. I think it's all fairly natural. OpenWhisk moved to the Apache Software Foundation. It's an incubation project, so I'm very familiar with ASF and how it works. So OpenWhisk has that going for it. Fission, that's probably what's the closest to Kubeless, and we've been talking with the developers of Fission.
Mm-hmm.
There are some differences of architecture. We use third-party resources and a controller and so on. They've done things a little bit differently to minimize the cold start. So they're, right now, to be honest, it's still at the, proof of concept stage. And I think, as things mature, we're going to have almost like an agreement on what is a good framework for serverless, what are the challenges for serverless, and then a solution will come out which will bring all those good design decisions together.
Yeah, no, and it makes sense, and it's funny in our industry we get so wrapped up in new stuff. I mean, you're literally talking about the KubeCon, the last KubeCon was in November. We're 3 or 4 months later, and it's like, why isn't this thing done yet? So it is kind of crazy. But so
we have to take our time and then develop the system, get feedback from users, see what are the pros and cons, and then iterate. Sometimes there's a little bit too much hype being put on like new tech and new software. So it's good to step back once in a while, take our time. But the very positive things is that we are seeing serverless solutions, or FAS solution, if you prefer to call them as FAS. We're seeing those solutions now, and it's great.
Yeah. Now, and I think it's good that we're seeing different implementations, because you're going to get some real world results from these things, right? So, like you said, not only is there going to be decisions about, is third-party resources and controllers a good way of doing this, but you're going to have the underlying like message buses. Is Kafka the right decision? Should we use NATs? Should we use there's so there's going to be different implementations there as well. And I think it's better to have people say this we've tried this and made this work versus making it just theoretical and so forth. So I think that's good.
And ultimately, what will make those solutions successful is if we have once we have users actually going in production with a framework like Kubeless on a Kubernetes cluster running in prod. That's the ultimate test and proof. Whether your idea has worked or not.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. So let's. We're gonna sort of wrap this up a little bit. I want to ask you one last question. Get back to Skippbox. What's how are people engaging? I know. I sat through some of the talks around Compose at the last KubeCon. You guys have a bunch of different tools to help people make their Kubernetes successful. How are people engaging around Kubernetes? What are you seeing as the things that people are successful with? Where are the pain points still in terms of the Kubernetes market?
So the first thing that I see is that the pace of adoption is extremely fast. If we compare with the cloud stack, definitely faster. You would probably have to compare with OpenStack in terms of pace of adoption. But even then, I think that people are embracing Kubernetes much faster than other techs. They're willing to jump and start learning the system and going with a POC. In on-prem and so on. So that's the big thing. And even in traditional markets, banks or security companies, you name it. So even traditional IT shops and companies that need some type of digital transformation, they're adopting it and embracing it much faster than other stuff. So that's the big thing. In terms of pain points, Skippbox, we provide training and consulting, as one of the businesses that we have, in addition to building software. But definitely people they may struggle a little bit with installation of Kubernetes, and that's what we hear in the community. People say, "Oh, it's much more difficult than Docker Swarm, for example."
Sure.
Personally, I don't think it is, because I've spent the last 10 years working on big system, whether it's CloudStack, OpenStack, OpenNebula, Hadoop, things like this. And those big distributed systems, they've always been a little bit of a challenge to install. I actually think that Kubernetes is extremely easy to install. It has also been extremely well designed, But that said, there are efforts like KubeADM that are making it even more easy to install. And when I do a training or I give a demo to people, I install a Kubernetes cluster, small 5-node Kubernetes cluster on DigitalOcean in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So all of that perception that Kubernetes is hard to install is going to fade away, and people will really embrace it. But now, and the reason why with Skippbox we started on Kubernetes and also what containers are changing is that you stop concentrating on servers on doing basic SSH to server, administration of servers, and you start concentrating on the apps. And that's really the big thing. So you get projects like Helm, which was pushed by the guys from Dace and Bitnami. I think those projects are great because you can now deploy distributed application extremely easily. You forget about the infrastructure; it's a utility, and you concentrate on managing your application, designing your application, and giving value to the users. So that's the big shift.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think you highlighted, like you said, I think we're seeing, at least I'm seeing. A ton of enterprise adoption, kind of across the board. It's not just the sort of Silicon Valley unicorns. Seeing a lot of different applications being put on Kubernetes. A lot of work in the industry in terms of trying to make it easier to set up. I think the whole Docker Swarm thing, a year or so ago, kind of was a wake up call, and people have done a lot to make it simple to get up and running. And
yep.
I would agree with all of those things. And I think I actually saw a stat yesterday or the day before that said that Kubernetes is actually now the number one most commented project on GitHub. So it's massive amount of community interest going on right now.
Yeah, I saw that too. So that's great to see. And definitely, like you said, it's not a project for the unicorn of Silicon Valley because there is terrific adoption in Europe.
Yeah.
And it's not only London. You get it in Germany, you get it France, Switzerland. So those are what I call more traditional markets. And they're not Silicon Valley, startups and so on. And I think that's a big difference, even with things like OpenStack. So I think that's great.
Yeah, no, I would agree as well. So listen, I'm going to let you go because you're busy and we're getting towards the end here. Thank you so much for everything today. If anybody wants to engage with you guys, what's the best way to reach out to you, talk to Skippbox, talk to you?
Yeah, ping us on Twitter @Skippbox or ping me directly @SebGoa on Twitter. And we'll get back to you quickly. And thanks for listening. I hope it was interesting. And Brian, thanks for having us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And folks, that's Skippbox with 2 P's. We'll get all the details in the show notes. So for Aaron and for Sebastien, thanks for the conversation today. Thanks for listening, folks, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.